Good evening. I'm Laura Sparks, president of the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art, and it is my honor to welcome you here this evening. The Cooper Union is among the nation's very best colleges for students pursuing degrees in art, architecture, and engineering. And since its founding in 1859, this institution has been guided by a commitment to advancing fair access to education for all, regardless of race, gender, religion, or class. This stage has been an integral part of our educational mission from the beginning. Through 160 years of social change, many of the world's most courageous voices and inventive minds have sought out the Great Hall as a public forum, a place to debate important issues of the day, to amplify calls for justice, and to inspire everyday New Yorkers. Generations of political leaders, civil rights activists, advocates, artists, and intellectual luminaries have addressed audiences from this very lectern. Among them are those who have contributed profoundly to stoking our collective imagination through storytelling. You may already have a sense of the remarkable diversity and notoriety of these storytellers from the street-level exhibition that's on view outside the windows of this building, on this side of the building. If you haven't seen it already, be sure to see it. Jose Antonio Vargas, Zadie Smith, and Cooper Union alumni like award-winning filmmaker Patty Jenkins have all brought us stories. Audiences have been moved, inspired, and transported to places near and far by these iconic storytellers from right here on this Great Hall stage. And tonight, we add two more, the amazing Neil Gaiman and Emily Wilson, joined by the incomparable Maria Dahvana Headley. Cooper Union's Great Hall remains to this day a platform for extraordinary individuals and fiercely creative voices, like our guests tonight. And it's also a place where connections are formed, where people of every background come together around the pursuit of knowledge and social progress. Over the years, this room has given birth to great movements and organizations, unique programs, bold ideas, and even a certain publishing house. More on that in a moment. You can learn more about the Great Hall's most memorable moments by visiting the Voices of the Great Hall from the Great Hall digital platform. There's actually a QR code in your program that will take you straight there. This is a new digital archive, and it encompasses all known sound and video recordings made in the Great Hall and held by the Cooper Union dating back to 1859. Evenings like tonight are only possible because of the dedication and the creativity of our staff. Many thanks to all of you. And I want to acknowledge the Robert David Lyon Gardiner Foundation for their extraordinarily generous support of both the Great Hall, the Voices of the Great Hall archive and our Great Hall programming, which is nearly always offered free and open to the public as it is tonight. So, if you enjoy yourselves this evening, as I know you will, please check out our programming and lineup of events and come back again and again. I think those of you who are here often know this is like a family, and we want to include so many more of you in it. So, now, on to that publishing house. We are deeply honored to celebrating the centenary of the W.W. Norton Company here in the Great Hall. In addition to holding a very special place in the legacy of our institution, Norton shares with Cooper a long-standing dedication to the role of education in lifting and empowering people to imagine a better world. Throughout its publishing history, Norton, much like Cooper, has endeavored to bridge academic, literary, and creative work with civic life and public service. Tonight, I am thrilled to welcome Norton home to the Great Hall to celebrate its 100-year legacy, and I'm delighted to introduce Julia Reedhead, the chairman and president of W.W. Norton Company. Julia is the first woman to lead the company, overseeing all of its groups, departments, and imprints. She previously served as the vice president and publishing director of Norton's college department, where for more than 30 years, she was the principal in-house editor of the lauded Norton anthologies, among them the Norton Anthology of English Literature and the first editions of the Norton Shakespeare, the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, and the Norton Anthology of World Religions. She is currently the chair of the Association of American Publishers, serves on the board of the National Book Foundation, and formerly chaired the Board of Governors of Yale University Press. Congratulations, Norton, and please join me in welcoming Julia Reedhead.
Thank you so much, Laura, for your warm and gracious introduction. I should note that Laura is the first woman to lead the Cooper Union in its 164-year history. Yes, yes. I would like to thank her, as well as Malcolm King, chair of Cooper's Board of Trustees, along with Kimberly Newman, Mindy Lang, Mark Rossi, and everyone at the Cooper Union who have helped to develop tonight's event, and Catherine Curran and the Robert David Lyon Gardiner Foundation for making it all possible. Being here tonight in the Great Hall, as Laura said, is a homecoming for everyone at the publishing house of W.W. Norton Company. And we are numerous. There are about 102 of us in the room. A century ago, two newlyweds were regulars in this hall. They were William Warder Norton, known as Warder, and Mary Dows Herter Norton, known as Polly. Warder Norton was from Ohio, but had moved to New York for business, and here he became deeply engaged in work on behalf of new immigrants. Polly Norton, a native New Yorker, was a polymath, a student of science, a professional violinist and violist, and a gifted translator. Warder and Polly came here to the Great Hall to see leading thinkers of the day share their knowledge with the public from this very stage. The lectures were presented by the People's Institute, an organization devoted to adult education for working people and recent immigrants in partnership with Cooper Union. Warder and Polly loved what was going on in the Great Hall. They loved that anybody, no matter how recently arrived in our country, no matter where they came from or what they did, could come to this hall free of charge and learn firsthand from the greatest intellects of the time. That was the promise of the People's Institute with Cooper Union. The Nortons became passionate about furthering this work. They wrote to Everett Dean Martin, the head of the People's Institute, and proposed to publish the lectures and make them available to readers hungry for knowledge. Martin agreed, and the People's Institute Publishing Company was born 100 years ago in November of 1923. And that symbol at the center of the slide was the publisher's colophon. The company's first publication was by Martin himself, his lectures on psychology delivered on this stage. The Nortons transcribed the lectures, printed each one as a pamphlet, and boxed them together as a set for bookstores. Psychology was followed by other collections of lectures from this stage, all of which met with critical acclaim and tremendous demand. Readers couldn't get enough of them. A few years later, the Nortons began acquiring books by leading intellectuals in the US and abroad, publishing Bertrand Russell, Sigmund Freud, poet and philosopher Rainer Maria Rilke, translated by Polly herself, Paul Becker, co-translated by Polly, and many others. In spring of 1926, the People's Institute Publishing Company was reincorporated as W.W. Norton and Company, or let's call it Norton. Over the years, Norton became known not only for its ever-evolving seagull colophon, but, yeah, there are a lot of them, but also for publishing books that educated, inspired, and endured. And in fact, by the mid-1930s, the Nortons had taken as their motto the phrase, "books that live." That phrase, the company's guiding principle, lived on, even after Warder Norton's early death in 1945. Polly then made an unheard of decision to help the company endure. She put Norton in the hands of its employees. Yeah. Thank you. And there it stays. We are the oldest and largest book publishing house owned wholly by its employees. In the past 10 decades, Norton has published thousands of books. You might have carried them in your backpacks, the Norton anthologies and critical editions, or textbooks like Give Me Liberty or We the People. Or you might have read them for pleasure or enlightenment, The Feminine Mystique, A Clockwork Orange, The Big Short, The Overstory. What are books that live? The Nortons said they were books, quote, published not for a single season, but for the years. Sometimes they are works translated for new readers, like Polly's Rilke. You can see it right up there at the end of the row. And sometimes they are timeless myths and epics that speak with a new voice to new generations. Tonight, in the Great Hall, we will bring to life the spirit that first inspired the Nortons as we welcome to the stage two dazzling minds and voices of our time, whose books exemplify books that live. One of these writers has been described by the scholar Maria Tatar as, quote, an accomplice of the gods, using the sorcery of words to make their stories new. His retelling of Norse mythology catapulted these ancient tales to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and has now, in turn, been translated into 39 more languages. The other speaker is fast becoming the preeminent modern translator of works from classical antiquity, whose 2017 translation of the Odyssey was called Staggeringly Superior, a classic in its own right, and whose newly released book has been described in the Washington Post as, quote, the Iliad we have all been waiting for, whether we knew it or not. These speakers are joined by a moderator whose translation of Beowulf, published by Ferris, Strauss, and Giroux, has been called electrifying. We thank the Strand booksellers for being here tonight to offer signed copies of all 3 titles, including a special limited edition of Norse Mythology created especially for tonight's event. And now, with profound gratitude to the Cooper Union for our shared history in this hall, and in celebration of Norton's 100th anniversary, I am thrilled to welcome to the stage these eminent thinkers to talk about books that live. Emily Wilson, Neil Gaiman, and moderator Maria Dahvana Headley.
Hello, everybody. This is such a privilege to be on this stage with Neil and Emily tonight and to listen to that incredible introduction talking about the way that oral history became Norton, the way that all of these lectures became the heft of the knowledge base of Norton. And these two authors beside me are a huge part of the continuing knowledge base of Norton. It's so joyful to be on stage with you too. And I'm happy to actually have this in person. I've seen a lot of you on sort of Zoom and far away over the past few years, and just talking heads and talking minds. And I've been deep in your books. So thank you for having me on stage with you.
I'm just thrilled to be here. There's such, there is something so special about being a Norton author. And just, there isn't another publisher like it. And being at the Cooper Union for this event, again, just feels like it's the right place and the right time. And now we just have to hope that you ask us questions that we can answer.
We can say no comment if need be.
Well, I want to start because we've all worked on these texts that are authored by people who are long dead. We've come into them and sort of dug our brains and our fingers and our panics and our emotions and entwined ourselves with these stories that are, in all cases, kind of, we have Homer, but we also have a lot of knowledge of the possible anonymous, unknown writers of those stories. We have Norse Mythology, which is a bunch of kind of folkloric and mythological and bits and pieces that Neil braided together in his Norse mythologies and reworked and recrafted. So I wanted to start this evening with a discussion with the two of you about what haunted you in each of these pieces of material? What ghost got to you and said, I have to get into these stories, I have to touch them, I have to work with them as a collaborator. Sometimes when I talk about working on Beowulf, I talk about holding hands with a ghost and bringing that ghost into the collaboration, trying to understand what the anonymous author of Beowulf was trying to say and make it make sense to us now in our world. And so I wanted to ask you both what you feel about that idea, if you disagree with me entirely, and if you agree, which ghost or which part of the ghostly corpus caused you to get into this? What tempted you? We can start with Emily.
That's such a difficult question for me. I mean, the question of why did I feel I had to do a translation is separate from why have I been obsessed with Homer for many decades.
Both questions are appropriate.
I've been obsessed with Homer, basically since I first encountered Greek myth as a little child when I first played Athena in a school play and sort of fell in love with that whole mythic world of a world where goddesses can swoop in and have encounters with mortal beings and just the excitement and adventure and diversity of the world of Greek myth. And then I've also then fell in love with the language once I started learning ancient Greek and learning these texts and learning to read them. And it was only really quite recently that I sort of realized, actually, I could do a translation, and that would enable these ghosts to come alive in a totally different way for people who can't read the original, but maybe they can hear some version of the music and the aliveness of these great poems that are obsessed with death and yet are so alive. And the wonderful characters also is part of why I'm still in love with these texts.
Short follow-up to that, which is that with the Iliad, a very different kind of story from the Odyssey. I mean, I know you've done lots of other work as well in translation and just deep thinking about all of these classical texts. In the Iliad, did you find that there was something that like screamed your name personally in a way that was different from what you were working on in the Odyssey? I've seen that you've talked a little bit about how much you love the Iliad.
I adore the Iliad. I mean, I adore the Odyssey as well. I'm not going to diss the Odyssey. I feel like that would be the wrong crowd to be dissing the Odyssey in front of. But I love the way that the Iliad, I feel, is always, I mean, the spinal tap thing of the amp that goes up to 11. The Iliad is always telling it way up, even beyond 11. And the level of intensity emotionally and sonically in the Iliad, and the way that it's so compressed in both space and time, that it all takes place over a month and a half, it's a really weird telling of the Trojan War myths, because it leaves most of them out. And instead it focuses on this completely minor episode and makes that minor episode about everything. And I love that. And I love just the way that it's so big and so small at the same time. In almost any passage you can think of, it's those things. It's intense, it's sonic, it's emotional, and it's huge and tiny.
Dense intimacy. It feels like reading it. It's so intimate and so... It's occasionally going through these texts because they don't always have dialogue that is set out. You get the sense, the fearful sense, I think, in the listings of names and the listings of ships, that maybe you are wandering in a zone of like, uh-oh, no one has spoken for 40 pages. And I feel like in your translation, it feels so, the language you're using is so vivid and feels so spoken that it just inherently feels juicy, and it's a huge accomplishment. It's so badass. I love it.
Thank you. Your Beowulf badass too.
To Neil.
So I love the idea of the ghosts that you're telling the story with. In Norse mythology, you've got a kind of two sets of ghosts, because the text that I worked from all the way through was the text of Snorri. Snorri Sturluson in Iceland, a politician, various other things, and a poet. And Snorri basically got worried about the fact that, 200 years after Christianity came into Iceland, and they voted and decided that they would become Christian, that the kennings, that the similes and metaphors that comprised Icelandic poetry were losing meaning because people didn't know the stories that they referred to. So he wrote two books, the prose Edda and the poetic Edda, which were compilations of other stuff and his own retellings to set these stories down for us. And if he hadn't, we wouldn't really have very much at all. But he gave us his version of the stories. But you definitely kind of feel that those weren't necessarily 100% the stories. The stories were much more alive. The stories were there being told. They were definitely part of the oral tradition. They were things that people went from place to place, and they would get drunk, and they would tell the stories, and there were hundreds of these stories, and they were part of the religion and part of the culture. And what we have is a small selection of them. So for me, what I was trying to do with the stories was always create versions of the stories that people could retell. People could read them and go, okay, that's the story. I'll tell that story around the campfire. And the idea of bringing those ghosts back and sending those ghosts out.
It's such a wonderful thing to imagine, the fattening of the ghosts, essentially, like the re-sanguinization of the ghosts, I guess. You're blooding them, giving them voice, But one of the things that I notice, especially about your Norse mythology, and I've read lots of your other work, we've known each other for a long time, and one of the things specifically about this book is that the voice of the book is such it's your voice, it's your lyrical, fluid prose voice and poetic voice. It's merged, but the voice sounds more like your voice than ever before to me. Somehow, you've done such a feat with this material. It's clear to me that this material created you in large part.
Oh God, yes. I mean that I was 6 years old, maybe 7 years old, when I picked up our next door neighbor Stephen Burns' copy of Tales of the Norsemen, I think it was called, by Roger Lancelin Green, and read these stories, and I'd kind of encountered I'd encountered Thor and Loki and Odin in comics, in reprints of American Thor comics, in English. I think a comic called Fantastic, or possibly Terrific. There was an entire line of them: Wham, Smash, Pow, Fantastic, and Terrific. And so I knew the characters a bit, but then reading those retellings, it was like I'd never met a mythic structure with an end before. And that thing excited me in a way that no other myth excites me. Because every other myth is sort of ongoing. We've got these gods, they're great, they're going to keep going forever. And Norse mythology is like, we've got these gods, they are doomed.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing about the Norse mythology. The notion of the coming of the end is so entwined with the entire cycle of stories. The idea that a writer prophecy is the sorceress, the vulva, is saying, it's all coming, let me tell you how it's going to go down, and you get that early in your text, and you are waiting for it the whole time. And it's such an overlap. I was looking as I was preparing for this for areas of overlap, and it's not hard to find them in these stories. They are coming from the same traditions from different places, but the same traditions of human interactions, of small petty disagreements, of like large world-shatteringly petty disagreements, and the things that humans have always cared about, things of grief and love, and can you find a partner that you actually like, or will you have to kill them? Can you find satisfaction? Can you learn how to be a good person? Do you care? Are you Loki? Are you a trickster? Or even if you are just a tool of the gods, all of the characters in these stories tend to have their own precise emotional arcs, and it's one of the things I think that is tempted.
I think, let me throw one other thing in here, that for me the biggest difference between Norse mythology and Greek mythology, and I love my Greek mythology, but is the weather. Because in Norse mythology, you are living in a place where the weather will kill you. Mm-hmm. The weather wants you dead. Mm-hmm. And everything for humans and for gods is about survival. It's about how to survive the winter, how to get through it. Whereas in Greek mythology, you kind of feel they have time to have, you can have a lovely time. You can stare into a pool and fall in love with your own reflection or whatever. Nobody in Norse mythology is going to do that because they freeze.
That leads me happily to something that I know Emily wants to talk about, which is the notions of not necessarily weather, but the natural world and climate that recur throughout the Iliad. Everyone is compared to weather. The surging armies are weatherish. They're also like migratory birds. They're like ants. And everyone in the minor unnamed characters are especially weathery. Like the battles themselves are weather. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you would like to speak to both to what Neil just said about the differing weather, and to what is actually in the text of the poem that you've just translated in terms of events, weather. What does it do to you?
I mean, weather is very intense in Homer, especially in the Iliad, and it is sometimes quite scary. I mean, the fear of an ignoble death by drowning, and of course, the great warrior characters want to die by being speared, like head on. They don't want to die by being flooded by a river or being drowned, or these terrifying buffeting storms that come across the mountains. I mean, those wonderful piling up of similes where it's about sound and it's also about the power of forces beyond your control. I mean, also the amazing passage in the middle of the poem where we have so much focus all the time on characters who want their name to live forever, and who want their name to live forever through stories, through not necessarily books that live, but songs that live, and stories that will live forever. And they want to have the funeral mound that will memorialize their name forever. But then we're also told, eventually, these great works of human beings, this great wall that the Greeks have built, will be washed away. Poseidon and Apollo will send all the rivers to flood together, flood across the whole plain. Oh my gosh, these books are never going to live. Yeah, they're all going to be washed away by nature, and there's going to be an apocalypse, and all the storms will buffet them, and the mountains will come down upon human works. And there's a way that it is an ecological vision as well. I mean, it does have a sense of maybe the gods will live forever, but we certainly won't. And there's real questions about whether anyone's name is ever going to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, even in the things that come out of this work, I just recently was working on the Aeneid, for example, which is based in all of the Homeric stuff. There is the mortifying feeling of being killed by weather, where someone will be like thrown from a ship, having not paid enough attention, and then the weather is personified, there's a god that's in charge of it. But it's an embarrassing and quiet little death that happens off the backside of the ship. And I think, but it's in the poem. Yep. We get the sense of what a quiet death looks like in all of these stories. We also get the sense of what an epic death looks like. One of the things that I was thinking about as I was working on imagining stories that live and what keep them alive is the span of experience that we get in both of these texts. We get all kinds of lives, even in the lives of the kind of epic heroes and the superpowered. We get the little miseries that are like in 2 lines, or sometimes the little miseries that turn into giant miseries, like Achilles' feelings of bitterness and jealousy and complaint to his mother, which then starts the whole thing going. I wanted to talk a little bit with you. I wanted to get your feelings about what are the tethers to, in your experience or in your souls? I'm going to get to your souls. What do you think it is in each of your stories, in each of these stories that are yours and also belong to the world, that have made them so enticing? What have made them so memorable? And I know we talked a little bit about meter, a little bit about verse techniques, and about lyrical techniques, so that's also part of this question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what are the emotional trigger points in your stories that you think have made these things so desirable to be memorized, to be recited, to be retold in games of telephone over millennia. What do you think those things are specifically in your texts?
I mean, I think in the Iliad, it's the intertwining of rage and grief, and that sort of eternal question of, is there any way out of that intertwining of people are furious, and so they kill each other, and so then there's grief, and so people are furious again, and so they kill each other, and there's no ending to the war, and there's the sort of question which runs through the whole poem of, is there anything beyond just a brief pause before we start killing each other again? And is there any way that grief can be an answer to rage? Or is it just that the poem progresses from focus on intense wrath and grief, wrath and rage, to a quieter sense of lament and grief, but then that's just a pause before the rage starts up again? Which seems to me an eternal sort of question, which has never felt more relevant than it does now, in a terrible way. I mean, that whole question of also how what the very powerful people's emotions and decisions can impact so many other human lives, which we're shown over and over in the Iliad, the intertwining of the ultra-powerful society on Olympus with the beings who live forever and whose rages will have a terrible impact on mortal lives, and then also the decisions of the leaders in both the Greek encampment and in the Trojan city, and how many people will be enslaved, how many babies will be held from the city walls as a result of all of those decisions, and all of those men who want their names to live forever, even if they may not. So I think those things are just so heartbreaking forever that I don't see how we can stop turning back to re-examine how are those themes of mortality and rage and grief presented in ways that both feel so familiar and also so alien.
We were talking backstage a little bit about what we can learn from stories like this, if they were created for us to learn from in some ways. And of course, some of these stories they're like morality tales. They're stories that are like, this is how you should live. But in this case, in both of these cases, these stories also serve a purpose of, here's what we're going to do after we're done fighting. We're going to listen to a story. And the stories have, alongside the rage and grief, which are so deep in the Iliad, there is a sense of story within a story. There are stories being told the whole time. We get little bits of what it's like to be an audience hearing a story. We get all of those things are braided into the text, which I think is it's interesting. I mean, these are obviously not meant to be morality manuals. They're meant to be entertainment and meant to be like acknowledgement of how it is to live as a human. Even the stories about gods, Norse mythology. I wanted to get your answer, circle back to you, your answer for like the tethers of what makes these stories survive.
I think in the case of Norse mythology, because you have, it's a long way away from the Iliad because you have very few people in there. There's a tiny handful of human beings. But what you have is you have gods and you have giants. And they are larger than life personalities. You meet Loki and you know Loki. You recognize him. You know that he is going to be driven by vanity, by pride, by mischief, by the desire to pull a fast one, and he's going to get you lot into trouble, and then he's going to get you out of trouble if you threaten him enough. And you know Thor, and he's huge and heroic and wonderful and not very bright. And they make no bones about that. You know, it's not like he's the sharpest hammer in the hammer bag. He's very, and then you have Odin, who is absolute intelligence personified and is utterly untrustworthy because he has his own agenda and it may not be good for you. And I feel like the people that you run into, watching them behave, just the feeling that you know them is really the thing that has carried the Norse stories through, with a sort of footnote that the shape of them, it's almost like there's a sort of a beautiful rainbow arch which starts with creation and optimism, and they're fixing things, and all the stories are kind of fun and they're funny and they all have happy endings and everything's going great, and maybe they get outsmarted by some smart giants from time to time, but that's all part of the fun. And then Balder gets killed, and from that point on everything just gets darker and messier, and Loki, who we thought we knew, and we thought he was this fun kind of anti-hero, roguish type that we really like, now comes in and does awful things to the point where the gods have to try and protect themselves from him. And he's picked sides, and it's not the side of the gods. And so you have this beautiful sort of rising and falling shape that is inevitably going to wind up in Ragnarok at the end. And I think that also is something that most mythic gods exist in this sort of wonderful eternal present in which they don't really change very much. You know, there aren't any stories where you can go, this is young Apollo. Well, you can go young Apollo, but as soon as he's adult Apollo, he's just the same Apollo all the way through the stories. He does Apollo things. There's not you don't get sort of messed up Apollo later on, and sad old Apollo, and drunk Apollo, and, you know, Apollo leading them all into awful trouble. But Norse, you actually kind of feel there's an arc there, which is special.
I was looking at the beginning of your book this morning and thinking about something that I hadn't thought about before, but is relevant to what you just said, which is the creation of the world, the moment when life comes into being, and it's kind of beautiful. There's a giant of no particular gender who can birth everything. But then the giant's body becomes the world. The giant's slain body becomes the world. So it begins with a violent, let's bleed the giant out situation, and let's look into the giant's skull that's now the ceiling of heaven, and we can have the whole world as a corpse, which is extraordinarily, I think, relevant to what it is to be a human looking around going, horrible things can happen, and I might not even be aware of them. They might be happening outside of my story, and less so in our world now. Now we can sort of see all of the fragments of the mythology happening simultaneously. We're reading all the stories. We're hearing little bits of individual stories from around the world and in places where wars are occurring, and getting the sense of the scattered story of humans all at once in a way that we've never really been able to do in the history of humans. We had one of these stories would maybe travel to our town and we would get a little taste and we'd be like, humans have done this, and I'm invigorated by the knowledge, or horrified and aghast at the knowledge that humans have always done this, that once again we're living on the corpse. Once again we're standing in the bones of the past. And I'm thinking about, I have some readings to introduce. Both of these wonderful authors are going to read from their work. And I think the readings surround this topic, actually, the topic of living amongst our dead, living amongst our ghosts, listening to the stories of our ancestors and of other people that we don't know, of strangers, and learning from those stories. And our curiosity about that as humans is one of the things that keeps these stories going as well, I think. So I know you've got some Ragnarok, and you, Emily, have
Achilles fighting the Trojans in the river.
Okay.
So which should we start with?
Which should we start with? I don't know. Whoever wants to go first. These are related, I think.
I'll start because you do the end of the world. Yes. So
yeah, he's doing the big ending.
I'm only going to do the end of one human life, but you can do the end of the whole world. So the Iliad, as I said, is about rage and grief. More specifically for people who haven't read it recently or haven't read it at all, I'll do the 1 second spoiler. It begins with a terrible quarrel between two Greek leaders, Achilles and Agamemnon, over an enslaved woman. And Achilles feels terribly disrespected, and he's aware that he's given his life for honor. If he stays at Troy, he will die. And so to lose even a smidgen of honor is terrible, because it's as if he's given his life for nothing. So he prays to his sea goddess mother Thetis, in honor of whom I'm wearing my hippocamp brooch, that he can get his honor restored to him by Thetis ensuring, with the help of Zeus, that while he sits out of the battle, there will be a massacre on his own side. So usually it's not a good thing for a leader to ensure a massacre on your own side. Usually you want the other side to be massacred. But in Achilles' case, by doing nothing, paradoxically not moving his swift feet at all, he causes massive casualties both on the Greek and the Trojan side. Sits out in his wrath, which allows for the rise of the Trojan warrior Herter to come and slaughter a lot of people, including Achilles' dearest friend Patroclus, who has gone out as his second self wearing Achilles' armor. And so after that death, it's as if Achilles himself is dead, but he comes out for the zombie apocalypse to be the dead man, killing more and more and more, and doing an endless kind of infinite revenge on all of the Trojans for what has been done to him in the slaughter of his dearest friend. So we've had a lot of slaughter already. I felt like I had to do a little bit of story because I'm going to read from late in the poem. We've had a lot of slaughter already at this point in the Iliad, but the slaughter enacted by Achilles feels special and different because it goes over the norms that we've had established already in the poem of ideally you don't fight against gods, you don't fight against nature, you don't kill people when they're unarmed and begging for mercy. And Achilles violates all of those norms. So I feel like it also is a theme of the slaughter of civilians is something that maybe is on all of our minds. So I'm just going to read a couple of lines in the Greek, and then I'll read a longer passage from my translation. So the Greek is in dactylic hexameter, which I hope you can hear. Al hote de poron ixon ureos potamoio, xanthu dine entos, hona thanatos tekatosius. Entha diatmexas tus men pedionta diuke prospolin, perakaio tus dominoi fobeonto, mitito protoro, hota maineto faidimos hector. After they reached the ford of flowing Xanthus, the eddying river, son of deathless Zeus, Achilles forced the Trojan troops apart, pursuing half out to the open plain, towards the city where the Greeks had fled in terror on the day before, when Hector raged on the battlefield. They rushed that way, routed, and Hera spread thick mist before them to block their path. Achilles trapped the others inside the silver-swirling river's depths. They tumbled in the water with loud splashes. The billowing streams were roaring, and the banks resounded all around them as they screamed and swam about in all directions, pulled by currents. As when locusts flee a blast of fire and fly away towards the river, and at the sudden onslaught of unwearied burning, they cower underneath the water. Just so the streams of murmuring, eddying Xanthus were full of men and horses intermingled. Divine Achilles left his spear to lie among the tamarisks on the riverbank. With just his sword, he leapt into the river, his heart intent on ruin, like a god. Whirling around, he hacked and slashed and struck them, and from the victims of his blade arose desperate, agonizing wails. The water ran red with blood, just as when other fish flee from a massive, monstrous dolphin, filling the nooks and hiding places of a harbor in terror, and he gulps the ones he catches. So did the Trojans cower and shrink back within the currents of the fearsome river beneath the overhanging banks. Achilles, after his hands grew tired from all the slaughter, picked out 12 boys alive as recompense for dead Patroclus. As he drove them out, as dazed as hunted fawns, and tied their hands behind their backs with finely fashioned cords that they themselves had worn around their tunics, he gave them to his comrades to escort back to the hollow ships, and leapt again into the river, eager for more slaughter. He found Lycaon, one of Priam's sons, trying to clamber out and flee the river. Achilles had already caught him once. He took him on his ship to well-built Lemnos and sold him as a slave to Jason's son. But then a guest friend came and set him free. Achilles saw him there, unarmed, no helmet or shield, and with no weapon in his hand, since he had thrown it all away from him onto the ground when he became exhausted and drenched in sweat as he was struggling to get out of the river. And Achilles brandished his long spear and prepared to strike. Lycaon ran beneath it, stooping down, and grabbed Achilles by the knees. The spear, longing to sate itself on human flesh, flew past his back and stood fixed in the earth. Lycaon clutched Achilles with one hand, and with the other clutched the pointed spear and would not let it go. He spoke winged words. "Achilles, please, I beg you by your knees to pity me. Do right by me and spare me. I have already been your suppliant, deserving grace from you, my lord, because it was from you that I first tasted bread. You have already killed my godlike brother amid the well-armed champions at the front, fine Polydorus, whom your sharp spear struck. Soon you will cause more pain to me as well. I do not think I will escape your hands, now a divinity has brought me here. But I will say one final thing to you. Consider this, I beg you. Do not kill me, because I did not share a womb with Hector, who killed your friend, who was both strong and kind." This was the plea of Priam's noble son. The answer he received was far from gentle. Fool, do not talk to me of ransom. Hush. Before Patroclus died and met his fate, I was a little more inclined to spare the Trojans. I took many of them prisoner and sold them off alive as slaves. But now, no Trojan will escape from death whenever a god casts one of you into my hands in front of Troy, especially sons of Priam. So die, my friend. Why are you so upset? Patroclus has already died as well, and he was far superior to you. Do you not see how tall and fine I am? My father was a noble, handsome man. My mother was a goddess. Even so, death and strong destiny will come for me, and there will be some dawn or noon or evening when somebody will take away my life in battle with a spear's throw or an arrow. At this, his victim's heart and body sank. He dropped the spear, knelt down, spread out his arms, and then Achilles drew his sharpened sword and struck his neck above the collarbone and drove the two-edged blade in all the way. He lay stretched out, face down upon the ground. Black blood dripped out of him and wet the earth. Achilles grabbed him by his foot and threw him into the river to be swept away, and triumphed over him with these winged words. Lie there among the fishes, who will lick blood from your wound. They will not care for you. Your mother will not lay you on a bier or offer ritual cries of grief for you. Instead, Scamander's eddying streams will bring you down to the sea's broad lap. A fish will leap beneath the darkening ripples through the waves to eat Lycaon's bright white shining fat. Die, all you Trojans! All of you must die until I reach the holy town of Troy, and you will run, but I will be behind you, slashing and slaying. You will get no help from this fair river with its silver streams, to whom you sacrificed so many bulls and horses, cast alive into the currents. Despite all that, you Trojans have to die by dreadful deaths until you have repaid the slaughter of Patroclus and the ruin you brought upon the other Greeks you killed beside the swift Greek ships while I was gone. At this, the river grew yet more enraged, wondering in his heart how best to make Achilles stop his deadly work and how to save the Trojans from destruction.
So amazing. So amazing. I'm not going to give any comments about that. I don't think we need any comments about that. That was just, it was intact.
I love that.
Yeah, incredible.
This is from the final chapter of Norse mythology. It's called Ragnarok, the final destiny of the gods. Until now, I have told you of things that have happened in the past, things that happened a long time ago. Now I shall tell you of the days to come. I shall tell you how it will end, and then how it will begin once more. These are dark days I will tell you of, dark days and hidden things concerning the ends of the earth and the death of the gods. Listen, and you will learn. This is how we will know that the end times are upon us. It will be far from the age of the gods, in the time of men. It will happen when the gods all sleep, every god but all-seeing Heimdall. He will watch everything as it begins, although he will be powerless to prevent what he sees from happening. It will begin with the winter. This will not be a normal winter. The winter will begin, and it will continue, winter following winter. There will be no spring, no warmth. People will be hungry, and they will be cold, and they will be angry. Great battles will take place all across the world. Brothers will fight brothers, fathers will kill sons, mothers and daughters will be set against each other, sisters will fall in battle with sisters and will watch their children murder each other in their turn. This will be the age of cruel winds, the age of people who become as wolves, who prey upon each other, who are no better than wild beasts. Twilight will come to the world, and the places where the humans live will fall into ruins, flaming briefly, then crashing down and crumbling into ash and devastation. Then, when the few remaining people are living like animals, the sun in the sky will vanish as if eaten by a wolf, and the moon will be taken from us too, and no one will be able to see the stars any longer. Darkness will fill the air, like ashes, like mist. This will be the time of the terrible winter that will not end, the Fimble winter. There will be snow driving in from all directions, fierce winds and cold, colder than you have ever imagined cold could be, an icy cold, so cold your lungs will ache when you breathe, so cold that the tears in your eyes will freeze. There will be no spring to relieve it, no summer, no autumn, only winter, followed by winter, followed by winter. After that, there will come the time of the great earthquakes. The mountains will shake and crumble. Trees will fall, and any remaining places where people live will be destroyed. The earthquakes will be so great that all bonds and shackles and fetters will be destroyed, all of them. Fenrir, the great wolf, will free himself from his shackles. His mouth will gape. His upper jaw will reach the heavens. The lower jaw will touch the earth. There is nothing he cannot eat, nothing he will not destroy. Flames come from his eyes and his nostrils. Where Fenris wolf walks, flaming destruction follows. There will be flooding too, as the seas rise and surge onto the land. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, huge and dangerous, will writhe in its fury closer and closer to the land. The venom from its fangs will spill into the water, poisoning all the sea life. It will spatter its black poison into the air in a fine spray, killing all the seabirds that breathe it. There will be no more life in the oceans where the Midgard serpent writhes. The rotted corpses of fish and of whales, of seals and sea monsters will wash in the waves. All who see the brothers, Fenrir the wolf and the Midgard serpent, the children of Loki, will know death. That is the beginning of the end. The misty sky will split apart with the sound of children screaming, and the sons of Muspel will ride down from the heavens, led by Surtra, the fire giant, holding high his sword which burns so brightly no mortal can look upon it. They will ride across the rainbow bridge, across Bifrost, and the rainbow will crumble as they ride, its once bright colors becoming shades of charcoal and of ash. There will never be another rainbow. Cliffs will crumble into the sea. Loki, who will have escaped from his bonds beneath the earth, will be the helmsman of the ship called Naglfar. This is the biggest ship there will ever have been. It is built of the fingernails of the dead. Naglfar floats upon the flooded seas. The crew looks out and sees only dead things floating and rotting on the surface of the ocean. Loki steers the ship, but its captain will be Hrym, leader of the frost giants. The surviving frost giants all follow Hrym, huge and inimical to humanity. They're Hrym's soldiers in the final battle. Loki's troops are the legions of hell. They're the uneasy dead, the ones who died shameful deaths, who will return to the earth to fight once more as walking corpses, determined to destroy anything that still loves and lives above the earth. All of them, giants and the dead, and the burning sons of Muspel will travel to the battle plain called Vigrid. Vigrid is huge, 300 miles across. Fenris Wolf pads his way there also, and the Midgard serpent will navigate the flooded seas until it too is close to Vigrid. Then it will writhe up onto the sand and force itself ashore. Only its head and the first mile or so of its body. Most of it will remain in the sea. They will form themselves into battle order. Surtra and the sons of Muspel will be there in flames. The warriors of Hel and Loki will be there from beneath the earth. The frost giants will be there. Hrim's troops, the mud freezing where they stand. Fenrir will be with them, and the Midgard serpent. The worst enemies that the mind can imagine will be there that day.
I just thought we should bring some chill and light and like joyful pleasure to the room with the darkest stuff that could possibly be read. But the reason that I kind of long to hear these stories tonight is probably the same reason they were created. We're all living in the end times always. One of the things about working with texts that are as old as these texts are is that you get the sense of the end, the resignation, it is over for all of us, and then what you have in your hand is a survivor's story. And then you are the next survivor who's going to tell the survivor's story. You're going to embroider upon it. You're going to tell your own survivor's story is interlaced with the last words of the culture. Beowulf has a story like that too. That's the survivors, the tale of everybody destroying everybody, and the last guy is left with all the money. And the cursed money. And he is on top of a big pile of gold thinking, I'm the richest man in the world and I'm all alone here. And we get a song from him in the middle of Beowulf that is not related to the time frame of Beowulf at all, but the storyteller felt an urge to tell us the story of a civilization before the civilization that we're in, and before that one, and before that one. And all of these stories have that kind of element to them. And also the element of the super enhanced version of the worst possible way that a person or a god could behave. Listening to that, I was thinking, listening to the Fenrir, especially the bit about Fenrir and his jaw, and having just heard Achilles and his jaw wanting to bite the world into pieces. I think as we are all living now in the year 2023, looking at the stories, looking at what is happening in the world right now, looking at what has always been happening in the world, it's a question of whether these stories were written to reconcile ourselves with the nature of humans, the way that we have to be, the way we've always been, the bad choices we've always made in regard to each other's comfort and safety. Listening to them, there's a sense of sort of peacefulness. The story is already there. I can't help it. But it's an interesting thing to be invigorated and to work on these stories, to feel yourself altering the story even as you touch it, as you both have done with these stories, changing them into things that are not modernized, that's not the right format for it, but made into something that can be in conversation with our society, as both of these stories just now were, like so fluidly and easily in conversation. I wanted to ask both of you, if you've had, as you go along, as you work on these things, because we work on all kinds of things, all of us on this stage, we do different things with the things we work on. Some of us invent whole cloth. Some of us shop in the past. Some translate, alter, adapt. But I wondered if you had a character or an event in either of these texts that you really wanted to change, to mess with it, change it, fuck it up. Is there something in there that you got to and you said, how could this possibly be in this story?
I just want to say no, because that was, for me, that would have been like suddenly playing tennis without a net. The whole joy of the thing is I am going to take the stories as they were told, even where they contradict each other, even when one story cannot happen because another story, he dies in this story, but later he's alive again or whatever. So there always would be things for continuity purposes, whatever, that I want to fix because they didn't quite make sense. But that was fine. The rules and the joy were, I will tell these the way that Snorri told them, and I will play fair with them.
Sort of according to the meter, in a metaphoric way of speaking, like working with the way that the lines have to scan, because there they are.
The only one where I did a thing where I got criticized a lot by reviewers who did not know as much as they thought they knew was, there is one poem, it's in both the prose Edda and the poetic Edda, and there are two different versions of it. And it's the story of Gerd and Frey. And in one of them, it's about whether or not Frey is going to get married to Gerd. He's fallen in love with her. He's never met her. He sends a representative to propose to her. And in the prose Edda, there is one version, and the poetic Edda, there is another. And in one version, the one that everybody knows, he basically just threatens her until she goes, yeah, okay, I'll marry you. And in one version, he doesn't. And I went, I get to choose. I'm going to choose the non-rapey version. So there are, and lots of reviewers were like, he seems to have changed this rapey story into a non-rapey story. How very woke. And you're like, no, actually, you have just missed the fact that there are two different versions, and I have picked the non-rapey version.
How very woke is just got me stopped. But the idea that in all of these texts there are variations, there are bits and bobs that could come in. I wanted to actually ask, based on that, if you had things of that kind, did you have something you wanted to change, and did you have any variations that you or ideas that other translators had used that you thought, I wouldn't have thought of doing it that way, but maybe that's going to make me gnash my teeth in a different direction on this line. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the joy of doing a translation as opposed to retelling, you have so much more freedom, or doing a literary critical analysis of the Iliad. You don't actually have to grapple with every single word or phrase. Whereas I love that doing a responsible translation meant I'm not going to leave anything out. I'm going to do the whole thing, and I'm going to think my way into why does this line make sense, or why does this character make sense, and how can we empathize with this character or feel the way that he or she is feeling, no matter what. And I felt that in doing that process that I understood all of the characters much better than I did at the start of it, even though I'd been reading the poem for so many years. Of course, with ancient texts, there were also questions about textual transmission. And maybe one example of that is that in the proem to the Iliad, we're told that the wrath of Achilles will result in men being made the spoils of dogs, and Oionoisi de daita is the reading that I go with. There's an alternative reading, which is most often printed, which is Oionoisi de pasi. So is it that the corpses will be eaten by all the birds, or will they be a banquet for the birds? And I went with banquet because I think it's a more interesting reading, because of course the birds are getting to do what the warriors want. They want a celebratory, triumphal feasting on their spoils after they've won. The animals are going to win if all the humans have killed each other. So I thought, just both in terms of the alliteration, both in the Greek and in what I could do with banquet birds, it worked better sonically and also worked better as an image. But I felt, obviously, if there are two ancient readings, then I have to do at least a little bit of, let me adjudicate between the ancient readings, and I'm not going to do a full re-edition for the translation, but I can at least, if I like that reading better, I can go with it. Yeah.
Okay, was there anything you wanted to change that if you were not a translator, if you were me, for example, a novelist, was there something in the Iliad that you wanted to get your fingers in? And I know you're not allowed, but was there anything that tempted you?
You know, there wasn't. I mean, I really like the Iliad. I mean, I'm now going to... I am now going to do a retelling of some Trojan War myths that are not so prominent in Homer, and for that I get to make a lot of things up. And so that I can... I mean, I think the thing about the Iliad is that it tells so little of the whole body of Trojan War myth, let alone the whole body of Greek myth. And it's so extremely... It's partly so intense because it's so selective. And so one thing to change is just to put more stuff into it, which of course most retellings of Homer add in a lot of stuff that's not in Homer. So changing, I'm not sure that I want to change anything, but I want to add things. I want to remember the stories that are excluded from the Homeric poems, as well as the stories that are not are included.
I think a lot about the Homeric comedies that we don't have. I think about how in my dreams one day I turn over a rock and I find beneath that rock the lost Homer,
it's the Mugglees,
and
yes.
It makes me want to be a forger. Like, I guess doing this kind of work is a little bit like forging. Even if you're working with the text, you're sort of trying to forge the voice. You're trying to get the right voice. You're trying to get the right feeling for that voice so that it feels real in a language that it didn't come from. And to make it feel real in English is a very different thing than making it feel real in the original languages and in the original tellings. And I just wanted to give my extreme respect and joy in listening to both of your feel real versions, because in both cases, the language is so clear, it's so lucid, it feels like a storyteller telling a story that I wouldn't want to turn away from. I wouldn't be napping or drunk in the corner. I mean, some people would be. These stories are built for napping and drunk people. Like, these stories have like lots of recaps and lots of like, let me tell that story again half a page later because everyone went to get a snack. Or let me tell this story of this wedding again at a slightly different angle. But I think these stories are built for human audiences. They're built for the vagaries and lost souledness of human audiences. But in this case, I feel like an immortal audience who wants to just listen and listen and listen to your work. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that I've harvested from the audience. And because we amazingly have, I'm not sure what time it is. Will anyone tell me what time it is? 8:15? Okay, we're good. We're right on schedule. Okay, so I've got a question for both of you, from Grace Mescal. What goes into the decision-making process when translating or retelling a myth in regards to preserving the historical accuracy of the myth versus making it more understandable to us in the modern day? And you've done different things with your myths, so yeah.
I think for me, it's, and I have the distinct advantage of not feeling obligated to give the original words. So I have a much broader sort of playing field. But for me, the biggest thing is just, can I get this, for want of a better word, to resonate? What I want to do is sort of strike a note and hope that that note will actually find resonance in the people hearing it, and that they will want to strike that note too. So always, my question is just, can I make it feel fresh? Can I make it feel new? Even if you know this story, can I get you to sit and listen to the end, wondering if it's going to come out differently this time? And that is, and I really didn't know if I could. It took me several years after I promised Amy Cherry that I would write this book. There were several years where all I did was think about the voice. It was like, okay, what voice are they told in? And then one day I sat down, and over a couple of weeks I wrote Thor's Wedding. And it was like, oh, I found my voice. It's really funny. But it's funny because, and I can go understated and I can do all of these kind of things, but it's all of these things because I want to be able to read this to an audience and have them laugh at the funny places that are they're not the jokes that a Viking bard would have made telling this, but they occur in the same places and do the same thing and make you feel like you're that audience.
Yeah, the jokes give you the sort of luscious gap that you need when you're telling a story. You need the gap to reset the audience's expectation, to make them able to be surprised. And I think that works so beautifully in this. Even when the jokes are modern, they feel calibrated according to the story.
The longest laugh I've ever had in my life at any kind of public event was in 2017, early 2017 at the town hall here in New York, reading the story The Master Builder, and it's the point where Odin announces that they're going to need a wall. Which at that point was so Trumpian, and the audience just laughed and they kept laughing, and I'm just waiting for it to stop, and it keeps going, and it was like, a year of Trump presidency suddenly was coming out, and I thought, okay, I've managed to write something that is astonishingly timely, and I wrote this bit 4 years ago, and yet somehow here it's caught something.
And probably, it seems true to me. I don't know if it's accurate what I'm saying, but it seems true that in the original tellings around fires and in dark places in the winter, that you kind of always had to have someone needing something too large to need. You always had to have someone wishing for something that was too much. As a joke, as an idea of like, we all want something that's too much. It's too cold, it's winter, or it's too hot, or we're in a war and it's horrible, and we need to tell stories at night when we're not fighting in order to survive, in order to like live through the events of our lives. Like these stories are interestingly all rigged for jokes. And for wit. There's wit throughout all of Homer's work, like kind of glorious bits of witty weirdness that show up and are very present in your translation as well. I just appreciate the ways that humor comes into these unfunny texts, like often thought of as unfunny, but the humor is braided together with the everything of being human in these stories, and the everything is of being a god who is written by humans.
For me, I had a sort of similar sense of like, what is the voice for Homer? What is the voice for the Iliad, and how is it different from the voice for the Odyssey? And also, like, even when I was starting off with the Odyssey, how is the voice for the Odyssey different from the voice I used before for Seneca? I want to have Seneca feel bombastic and show off and full of fancy literary allusions. The Homeric poems are not like that, so I need a different voice. And so being a translator is also about this whole chameleonic, I have to switch to a different voice. And just because maybe the same readers will read this book that read the other book, it has to be a completely different voice. And there has to also be a different voice when Achilles is speaking versus when Agamemnon is speaking. I mean, at each moment, there has to be these sort of flips of which world are we in? I mean, for me, there was a big struggle about how can I make sure that the reader doesn't laugh too much and too soon. And that if this is a lot of men screaming at each other, that couldn't very easily seem as if I'm mocking them, and I'm not. I want you to take it absolutely seriously, because so many lives depend on these furious men with their rage and this utterly destructive, intense emotions that we should take totally seriously, even if on some level the trash talking is hilarious. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, catastrophic pettiness and catastrophic feelings of like lack of status are so much across all of this text, and in fact both of these texts. The idea of like increased damage in Loki because he does not get the love that he wants, does not get the like sort of pure love that he wants, and continues to get angrier and angrier. And similar things, we've got Achilles feeling angrier and angrier and angrier until finally he is overwhelmed by rage. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so necessary in working with this material to sort of press it together with the smallness against the large landscape of emotion that is world-shattering, world-changing, but the miniature elements of emotional, the little bitty emotional arcs that everyone has in these stories, even though they're not necessarily visible in all translations or in all retellings of the story. Sometimes these stories are told in a way that is very formal and sort of distanced from the emotion, and in your translations, they're formal, they're in verse, they're like very carefully crafted, but the emotions are not distanced, that you really feel why that might happen and why someone might make a bad choice based on a feeling of injury or a feeling of like status-based anxiety, and make a bad choice that changes the world, which same in Norse mythology. So beautiful and so weird. Humans are weird. We tell weird stories about our pain, and sometimes stories that are like beautiful, stunning stories about our divorces or about our like small bitternesses, and they become epics and last for thousands of years. It's amazing. Okay, I've got another. Let's see. Oh, this one. Well, this is really somewhat for both of you. I think I can craft it to be for both of you. This is from Vanessa Medina Vasquez. To me, and it's for Neil originally, to me your stories are characterized by an engagement with at times quite dark and cynical ideas, but with this ultimate hope for humanity and imagination. How do you reckon the fantasy genre enables you to explore that? And for Emily, I think this applies to epic work in general, to how do you imagine that epics enable you to explore the idea of being human, translating epics, and applying your sensibility to the translations?
I think that for me as a writer, if there isn't hope somewhere, then there's no point in writing. I feel like there's enough bleakness, darkness, doom, and idiocy out there. There's enough murder, monstrousness, short-sightedness, and apocalypse floating in the air that we breathe and in the news that we listen to and in the world at large, that it's there anyway. And my job has to be, even if it's cockeyed, even if it's lopsided, even if it's a tiny thing that I'm offering at the end, like hope in Pandora's jar, you've got to offer hope.
Hence the very end, appropriately, of Norse mythology with the game and the sort of beginning again.
Yes. Which is implicit in Snorri, but not explicit, and I just made it a little more explicit.
Yes, when I read it, I went back to Snorri and said, "Is it really?" Yeah, it's there. It's there.
They go and find these little golden chess pieces in the grass. So
they start to play again,
Yep.
as we do. Yeah. What do you think about that, Emily?
I'm not sure about hope in the Iliad, but I do see it that I feel like it's a pretty dark poem. You know, I mean, what we're left with at the end is, in a sense, hope in that there's a possibility for empathy and for naming the pain and telling the stories about those who are dead. And it ends with lament, and it also ends with even enemies, even the man who's killed Priam's many sons can have a moment of crying with him. And we can understand each other. And I think that's what both the task of translation is about, understanding this very, very ancient, very alien text and making it comprehensible and viscerally emotional and poetic and musical and alive for new readers, new audiences. And understanding each other is a kind of hope, even if there's not much else, that we can at least cry together.
Yeah, I mean, like making a text like this, which is not understandable to most of us. Most of us are not reading in ancient Greek, and even if we were, we aren't ancient Greeks. So, like, getting to the sense through your translation of living alongside these characters and getting into their hearts and minds and their grief, and watching them grieve, watching them mourn, essentially the naming of the dead over and over again is such a vital part of the tradition of humanity, and part of the reason that we're storytellers to begin with, I think, is, I mean, we were talking sort of slightly joking backstage that everyone becomes a writer in order to change the world, but we don't we don't know how to get it done, but we're all sort of trying. We're trying to change it in whichever way, sometimes bad ways. Not all of us are like virtuous all the time. But I have another question, this is a more lighthearted question relating to changing the world personally. If you could have one do-over in your writing career, what would it be?
You know, the trouble is that even the stupidest things that I've done, I learned lessons from. I was about to say, if I could change anything, I wouldn't have written the Duran Duran biography in 1985. But having said that, the most important, the Duran Duran biography, so it came out. I was a starving young journalist. It sold out the first print run in like 2 weeks. It was out of print. I'm sitting there. I know how much I'm getting from each copy. I'm working out my royalties. I'm really excited. I have this career waiting for me, writing cheap and cheerful rock and roll biographies. And then the following week, Proteus Publishing is taken into involuntary liquidation. I never see a penny of it. The book disappears forever. And I sit there going, I spent 4 months of my life writing a book that I would never have wanted to read. And I did it for the money. And I didn't get the money. And so I don't think I'm going to do that again in future. I'm going to do things that I'm really interested in and care about. And if I don't get the money, at least I'll have the thing that I'm proud of. And it was a really fabulous lesson to learn. And if I took that out, I might have made terrible mistakes since.
I like the like lost library, the imaginary lost library of Neil Gaiman that contains all of the wrong choices, all of the books that the whoops books. How about you, Emily?
I don't think I regret anything. I mean, whenever I turn back to especially my translations, I always want to twiddle and tweak something, and because translation is, I think, even more than other kinds of writing, you're constantly wanting to revise and revise and revise and get it closer and closer and closer, and then the deadline comes and it's finished and it's out in the world, and I still want to, play around with it. I would change every word and do it all again for another 5 years if I got the time. Might doesn't work. Anyway, but I don't regret anything.
I like ending this evening on an I don't regret anything, or if I do, I learned a lot from it. I think all the authors of these original texts also learned a lot from it, probably as they went along. And the people who continued to work on these stories over time, including all of us, have learned a lot from working on the stories of the dead and the stories of the sort of wandering entertainers of the history of the world. And I hope you've enjoyed this evening. Our books are all signed and for sale out there. I think that's what I'm supposed to say. I want to thank Cooper Union and Norton for inviting us to celebrate 100 years. It's so extraordinary, this giant body of incredible work. And I want to thank Neil and Emily for being on stage here, and I hope you'll all join me in a round of applause.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you.